Because at the end of the day, really as a leader, what you need is followership. And you're only going to have people follow you if they trust you and you have a connection with them.
All right, welcome back to the Witz Podcast. Once again, as usual, we have a wicked awesome guest today, Mr. Jordan Berman. Jordan is the Vice President of Global Corporate Affairs, Business Transformation, and Strategic Planning for a global pharmaceutical company called Apotex. You have an MBA from Kellogg's. You're currently lecturing and speaking and doing a number of sessions at Schulich Biz. You have flown around the world dealing with things like trust and communication. You've worked with thousands of leaders when it comes down to things like leadership skills, driving culture, and we're here to talk about not only your book, but what we need to do as leaders today to build trust, to build community, to build connection, and the specifics of the Trust Trifecta. So Jordan, welcome to the show. Really excited to have you.
Great. Thanks for having me, Greg.
You've just finished this book called The Trust Trifecta. Very cool. As mentioned, I'm sort of well into it, and I love what I'm reading so far, and it aligns with everything that we do. And as you know, our company is all about making humans better humans, and you reached out, and we're here. So welcome to the show, man.
Great. Thanks for having me.
Anytime. All right. So Jordan, let's talk. Where do you want to start? Well, you want to give us a little bit of an overview of the book? Maybe we could start with that. Tell us what the Trust Trifecta is all about. Why did you write it? Let's start
sure.
there.
Well, I wrote it because, having worked for the past 30 years and coached and worked with hundreds of leaders, I saw an opportunity to kind of reinforce some of the lessons I've learned to help other leaders. And when I say leaders, and Greg, you would appreciate this, I don't necessarily mean CEOs. It could be a people leader, a manager. It's just somebody who leads other people. It could be a team of one or it could be a team of 100,000. And really, the Trust Trifecta is an approach to communicating a specific way in order to build a connection. Because at the end of the day, really as a leader, what you need is followership. And you're only going to have people follow you if they trust you and you have a connection with them.
Yeah, and I got to tell you, this is a big word, right? I think a big word I'm hearing, at least in the industry, is things like trust and transparency. Another big word is authenticity, right? So everyone's screaming this, and I think where this stuff gets lost is, the intention of learning more about things like trust and thinking about things or being more conscious in how I show up as a leader. The intention is there. But, how many people actually do this well? I mean, you've been around all sorts of leaders. The one thing that leadership needs, in fact, we could argue the most important thing is to have that connection and trust. And the majority of them fuck it up. So, I mean, why? Why is it so hard for us to build trust with people?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and it's a complex one. There are lots of reasons. And if you look at the three principles of the Trust Trifecta, consistency, transparency, and authenticity, there are challenges in each of those areas that leaders have when they communicate. And a lot of it has to do with vulnerability, for sure, and the willingness to be vulnerable. People show up at work and they think they have to have their work self and they can't bring any of their personal self to work.
Do you still see that? I'm often in rooms with people talking about the importance of or talking about the point there's no separation between home and work anymore. Specifically since this pandemic has hit, right? I mean, now we're literally working out of our houses, right? But you still find that happens in sort of big corporate?
I do, yeah. I've worked in multinational corporations. I've worked at small privately held companies. I've worked in not-for-profits and consulting sectors. It doesn't matter the setting. Big or small, publicly traded or privately held. I've seen it with all leaders who are new to role, leaders who are veterans in role, leaders who are male, female, from different cultures. I've worked with about 10 or 12 different CEOs alone in the past 10 years. And so I do still see it. I'll tell you a story about one a few years ago. And this individual was smart, capable, credible, had credentials. And she showed up at the company that she was joining, which was ours, from another affiliate. So this was a global company. And she had about 2 minutes to introduce herself. And before she introduced herself, the current president introduced her and said all great things about why she was qualified and she was going to help take us to the next level. And then she got up and she spoke, and I look forward to working with all of you. And literally, Greg, she was up there for 2 minutes, and within 30 seconds after she stepped away from the podium, I heard a few feet back from me somebody whisper and say, I don't trust her. Now you have to ask yourself, this person is a complete stranger talking to a few hundred people. Nobody knows her. Why does somebody say that?
Yeah,
and it's because it's a feeling. It's a feeling. Trust is a feeling.
Yeah.
And it's visceral. And we're all human by nature, and we're all emotional. And so when you look at trust, you have to look at how do you make people feel? Well, people trust you when they feel they know you. People trust you when they feel you're being straight with them. So that's the authenticity. They feel they know you.
Right.
When you're being straight with them, that's the transparency. And people feel you, they trust you rather when you're consistent. Because if you say one thing and do another thing, that erodes your trust. And that's why those are the principles, if you will, of the trifecta. And for those of you who are not horse racing enthusiasts, and I'm not, the trifecta is a bet in horse racing. And the bettor has to choose the first, second, and third place horse in that row in order to hit the trifecta, which is the huge jackpot.
Right.
And similar, an analogy to the trifecta is that consistency, transparency, and authenticity also have their role or position, so to speak, with authenticity being the most coveted. Meaning,
so is there an order to
is.
this?
So
talk to us
it's
about
the
order.
most coveted.
Okay, so one is authenticity.
One is authenticity. It's the most coveted. And the reason it's the most coveted is because you actually could have people that you've met, and I'm sure you have, and I have met people who maybe haven't been consistent, maybe haven't been transparent, but they're so genuine that you trust them. You honestly feel a connection to them. And so you trust them. So that's why it carries the most weight.
So how do you define authenticity? Because you use the word there, which is descriptive. But, if someone says, how do I be authentic? What would you say?
Yeah. A big part of that is around what I said about vulnerability. And there are courses now. I mean, you can learn authentic leadership, right? Schulich, where I teach, they're having a course this year on authentic leadership. Harvard's taught one for the past few years. I don't know what their curriculum is, but a lot of it's about your behaviors for sure. And part of that, I think, is about vulnerability. I think that you have to show a little bit of your personal self to make a connection to someone.
Right.
This same person who I'm talking about, who got up on that podium, I ended up working with her closely for about 1.5 years, and she didn't last long. It didn't work out. And I can tell you, I like to kibitz when I sit down with someone before we get to business, and I would come in, I'd say, how was your weekend? What's going on? How are your kids? And she would never give up an inch. And I wasn't asking personal information. I wasn't asking, like, can you tell me what's in your bank account? What kind of car do you drive or whatever? How was your weekend? Where did you go? What did you do? She wouldn't give up a thing. Nothing. And so that's hard to build a connection with someone when they're that guarded, when they're that closed-knit, and polished and articulate, but just too polished and articulate, not relaxed and just being themselves.
We might say that this individual is a product of their environment, their nurturance, how they were raised, right?
Very much so.
And I think this has a lot. And I was going to ask you earlier, do you find that there's a generational divide, or that you see this differently with generations? Let's just go say, like, maybe the older boomer to silent generation has more difficulty trusting versus the X versus the millennial versus the Z versus the A versus, right? I don't want to make this a generational conversation, but
no, it's a great point. What I would say, let me get back to your social conditioning comment though, about the way you brought up, because that's one of the things I talk about in the book. And social conditioning does play a big factor in this. And that's because if you're brought up in a household, let's say, that's very strict, and you are expected to talk a certain way and not talk about certain things, that is absolutely going to shape your communication style when you grow up.
Sure.
And so if you're one of those people, that background, that baggage, that comes with you. So I just want to circle back because I think you're spot on. That's a great point.
Right.
As far as have I seen any difference, I would say yes. On just the trust spectrum, what I would say is, younger people these days pick up more easily and are more sensitized maybe to the fact that they don't trust someone. Whereas people who are older, it just doesn't bother them as much.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily that I think it doesn't infect them. I just don't think it impacts them the way it does younger people.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you were talking about sort of, people having difficulty being vulnerable, and social media is a complete contradiction to, in some cases, vulnerability, and authenticity and transparency, because everyone's trying to put it on. You use the example of people would come into the office and they put their sort of work mask on, and they would sort of, be like, all right, well, here's Greg all day, and, nothing's getting through the shield,
right? I'm very formal.
Right. And in some cases, we're living in this world which people are selling vulnerability courses. Brene Brown is amazing. I'm sure you know of her, right?
Yes, I do.
I think the whole audience knows of who she is, but she's fantastic and talks a lot about vulnerability. I'm Greg Witz. Thanks so much for coming and checking out the video. If you like that video, you're going to love the next one. So I'd highly suggest that you click this video over here. And don't forget to subscribe and share.